This tiny island, Great Britain, is a gardener's Eden, a fertile landscape shaped and nurtured for over 500 years, as much by humble peasant as by gardening visionary. Given the same climatic, botanical and horticultural ingredients, each British gardener miraculously manages to create a style of garden that is unique. From the most humble to the grand, fanciful and formal, romantic and regal, each garden has its own very special story to tell. Close to the midpoint, up Britain's west coast, amid the mountains of Cumbria, is the magical Lake District. On the edge of this county, with its extraordinary scenic beauty, is a handsome grey stone house. This is Levens Hall, which has remained in the hands of one family for over 700 years. To wander unsuspecting into the garden at Levens Hall can be an exhilarating experience, both cultural and horticultural. For here, in front of the part medieval, part Elizabethan house, is the oldest and most extensive topiary garden in the world. Considering their flawless condition and sense of whimsy, it's hard to think of them as being over 300 years old. It was a Frenchman, Guillaume Beaumont, who first planted and trained the topiary garden in 1694. His employer at the time was Colonel James Graham, the owner of Levens Hall. It is probable that Colonel Graham gained ownership of Levens Hall from a kinsman on the turn of the Ace of Hearts during a card game in 1688. That explains the heart that appears on the weather vane and on the downspouts. Beaumont's brilliant sculpting of yew and various forms of box has survived well through the centuries. The box-hedged beds are filled in summer with white marguerite daisies, helichrysum, verbena, and artemisia. But there's more to this 10-acre horticultural treasure than box, beech, and yew. The other side of a tall hedge is a magnificent double herbaceous border. A variety of shrub roses, billowy white cranberry, and giant thistly cardoon anchor these borders, which contain a virtual who's who of perennials. And one side of these borders is quite dramatic. This continuous bank of Nepeta weaves a striking purple ribbon around the lawn. In early summer, it's not, as would be expected, roses that take center stage in the rose garden at Levens Hall, but many varieties of foxglove. On closer inspection, the intricately shaped beds do include a collection of David Austin English roses. In the back of the rose garden is Monsieur Beaumont's lovely wisteria-covered house, built in 1690. This recently planted area is called the 17th Century Garden, so named because all the plants here would have been familiar to the gardeners of 300 years ago. The geometric beds contain many old roses and cottage garden favorites such as this perennial, Lyctus chalcedonica, also known as Maltese cross, and varieties of campanula. Certainly this is a fascinating and peaceful little garden to reflect on the past. There are more gardens, an orchard, and other areas of interest at Levens Hall, including this herb garden, with its wigwams covered with golden hops, clumps of lavender, and backdrop of jagged leaf cardoons. Head gardener Chris Crowder was on hand to provide some brief personal insights on this extraordinary garden at Levens Hall.
The topiary at Levens Hall was planted almost exactly 300 years ago now. Monsieur Guillaume Beaumont, a Frenchman, came and laid out the gardens here at Levens, laid out the system of pathways that still remains intact. And Levens is an interesting and unusual garden, really, because 50 years later, in the 1730s, and for much of the rest of the century, these formal gardens went way out of fashion, and everybody that was anybody would have had a capability brown or similar landscape put in, and all these topiary bushes pulled out. Levens Hall's gardens remained through that century and have actually remained up to this day, when similar gardens have been a big problem because of lack of labour. There are 4 of us looking after the gardens now, and it takes, well, this last year we started clipping these hedges in August and using electric shears and scaffolding to get through it all. It actually took till March to finish, so it's a mammoth task. Although we quite enjoy starting it, after the first few weeks it gets a bit tedious, and then towards the end we're really glad to finish it.
Travelling north to Scotland and toward the east coast, the land becomes more rugged. Just below Aberdeen, in the woodlands of Royal Deeside, stands a beautiful castle of fairy tale imaginings. This is Crathis Castle, built in the 16th century with walls of granite 5 feet thick. Like all castles, it comes with round towers, conical roofs, overhanging turrets, and gargoyles in the form of cannons. But this castle has something special, a spectacular walled garden of almost 4 acres. The garden as it exists today was created by Sir James and Lady Sybil Burnett, starting in 1926. Although parts of the garden date back almost 300 years. The garden is divided into 8 separate rooms. 4 of them on the upper level, bounded by towering yew hedges, are ornamental in nature. The 4 lower ones are given over to profuse herbaceous plantings, brilliantly conceived borders, and color-themed areas. In the fountain garden, one of the formal spaces, a bed of yellow daylilies frame the simple fountain in the center of the spacious lawn. Behind is the magnificent yew topiary wall, which is said to date back to 1702. The old stone wall on the garden's north side is home to a variety of climbing roses and honeysuckle. The beds below are deep and luxuriant. Here and there are columbines, iris, lady's mantle, valerian, more roses, poppies mixed in with pyrethrum, and many other plants and shrubs. With its perfect line of sight to the castle, this border in one of the lower gardens comes alive in early summer, hence its name, the June border. Much of the color is provided by a swaying sea of lupins. Here and there, poppies make bold slashes of orange and red. Pyrethrum and Stachys macrantha add their electric colors. Too much red? How about some purple and white iris? And of course, it wouldn't be Scotland without the traditional thistle. Once in a while, handsome iron gates set in the old stone wall separate the lushly planted beds that trace the garden's perimeter. Around every turn there's a new and pleasurable sight, like the exotic blooms of these Siberian iris. The borders at Crathis are considered by many to be among the finest in Britain. This expansive double herbaceous border starts at the old Portugal laurel tree, which forms the center point of the lower garden. Unlike the dramatic June border, the use of color here is more restrained. Another impressive herbaceous border stretches half the length of the lower west wall. The overall effect is soft and sophisticated, but on closer inspection, this bold confection of very blue clematis and campanula is not quite so subtle. Yet another border, but in this one the flowers are all white, and there are lots of them. A shady arch festooned with golden hops leads to one of the most unique garden rooms at Crathes. This, for good reason, is called the Golden Garden. Possibly inspired by the writings of Gertrude Jekyll, this garden is little more than 20 years old. This is where flowers are put aside for the moment and foliage is given a chance to play the leading role. Stately conifers, including superb examples of golden yew, elder and elegant cypress, form the backdrop to this vision of gold and yellow. Berberis, hypericum, holly, philadelphus, and a medley of other shrubs and plants fill the deep beds, each making their own leafy impression. Before leaving this enchanting castle garden, let's take a peek in the immaculate Victorian greenhouses. Looking up with their happy painted faces is a charming collection of pelargoniums, geraniums, and other ornamental plants. A very cheering scene to end a day at spellbinding Crathes Castle Garden. Almost in the geographic centre of England, amid the green farmlands of Staffordshire, stands a grand mansion surrounded by gardens and a vast landscaped park. This is Shugborough, home of the Queen's cousin, the Earl of Lichfield. The story of Shugborough should rightfully start with a man who has been hailed as the father of the British Navy, Admiral Lord Anson. It is as a result of his brilliant naval career and epic victories at sea that Shugborough exists as it does today. Most of its development in the 18th century was made possible from the fortunes of war received by Admiral Anson. But Admiral Anson never owned Shugborough. It was his older brother Thomas who inherited the estate in 1720. Soon thereafter, he began the task of transforming the house to a mansion and the surrounding park into one of the finest landscape gardens in Britain. The garden on the west side of the house is a series of formal terraced lawns. The parade of clipped golden yews with stone urns was laid out at the turn of the century. The bed crossing the terrace is planted with the yellow Floribunda rose Bright Smile. Originally the site of Thomas Anson's bowling green, the lawns step gently down to the lazy, flowing River Sow. Here stands the first of Shugborough's enigmatic 18th century monuments, aptly called the Ruin. Partly smothered by an old wild rose, what remains of a stone druid figure is seated on a rubble ledge. Looking as though they belong in a constable landscape, longhorn cattle graze in the fertile meadows on the opposite river bank. Close to the house on the south side is the rose garden. What makes this small garden worthy of special note is that it was designed by famed rosarian Graham Stuart Thomas, who has been called the world's greatest living gardener. Victorian in character, its symmetrical beds are planted with a variety of polyantha and old roses, like this rugosa rose, scabrosa. Climbing roses are trained on domed metal towers and arches. Following the path along the river, flanked by superb specimens of trees, there's a truly unexpected sight. A crimson painted bridge leads to Shugborough's second monument, the Chinese house. Though it is ornamental in nature, a 1782 journal stated, "The Chinese house is a true pattern of the architecture of that nation, not a mongrel invention of British carpenters." Just around the corner are two more monuments. Two reasons are offered to explain the incongruous presence of the cat. The first suggests that it commemorates a cat which accompanied Admiral Anson on his voyages. The other, that it is a memorial to his brother Thomas's pet breed of Persian cats. A few steps away is the most puzzling of all the park's attractions, the Shepherd's Monument. It takes its name from the marble relief with its pastoral figures, based on a painting by 17th century artist Nicolas Poussin. What has caused much speculation over the last 200 years, however, is the 10-letter cryptic inscription. It remains a mystery to this day. Walking or driving through the park will reveal the remainder of Shugborough's Palladian-inspired monuments, the Tower of the Winds, based on its namesake building in Athens. Close to the park entrance stands yet another Athenian-inspired monument, the beautifully decorated Lantern of Demosthenes. The Doric Temple is yet another. And lastly, the towering Triumphal Arch, with its intricate masonry work. The construction estimate in 1761, submitted by the Oxfordshire mason, was for £282, or roughly $450. Most would agree, however, that Shugborough's greatness rests to a great extent on its magnificent landscaped parkland, superb trees, and Arcadian beauty. Thomas Anson's development of Shugborough was by any standards ambitious and determined. One 10-year phase of his master plan called for the piece-by-piece acquisition and removal of an entire village, its fields, roads, mills, and cottages, to create this heroic ornamental landscape. Lord Lichfield, the 5th Earl to live at Shugborough, was kind enough to share a few memories and anecdotes about this very special English garden.
Here we are in the gardens at Shugborough, which is my home and has been all my life, although the gardens have changed significantly in the time that I've been alive, and even more, of course, before, because they've changed in their composition and layout from the 18th century right through to now. The time I can remember best, of course, is really post-war years, though I have some recollection of the gardens actually growing carrots rather than roses as a war effort. The parkland at Shugborough, which comprises just under 1,000 acres, is interesting in several ways. One is that the main London-Scotland Railway goes through the middle of the park, but is tunnelled for a large part of it. This was done in the mid-19th century, when the first Lord Lichfield was conveniently the first Postmaster General, and he therefore had some say in the layout of the railways, and he in fact instigated the tunnel, thus reducing the noise in the park. And during the war, the tunnel had to be manned by the Home Guard, or Dad's Army, which was great fun for me and my sister. And it's always been a large area of, incredible privilege, really, for two children. Now, of course, it's enjoyed by a great number of people. Up to 300,000 people a year come into it, so it doesn't have the privacy element, but at least it has the feeling of being looked at and looked after, which is one of the advantages of having a house that's open to the public.
In the county of Wiltshire, just a few miles from the city of Bath, famous since Roman times for its mineral springs and for its Georgian architecture, lies the tiny hamlet of Iford. Here at Iford Manor is one of Britain's most intriguing gardens. The manor house presides over an idyllic valley. with the leisurely River Frome at its doorstep. A figure of Britannia stands guard on the bridge, looking out to the nearby meadow, which is still known as the Archery Ground. The name comes from a period preceding the Battle of Agincourt, when each village in Britain was required to provide a certain number of trained bowmen. But Iford Manor owes its present-day distinction to its garden and the gardener who created it. Harold Ainsworth Peto, a respected architect, purchased the then dilapidated house with its steeply sloped woodland in 1899. Peto's gardening philosophy was unique at the time. He proposed that a garden must be a combination of both plants and architecture. In the case of Iford, it was the antiquity and romantic aura of old Italian gardens that would influence Peto over the 33 years it took him to fashion this terraced Mediterranean masterpiece. A few steps from pastoral English meadow and rural views is a world of Italianate beauty. At the foot of a steep flight of terraced steps is a small paved court. Peto's signature is immediately established. The sound of water, crumbling marble figures on pedestals, ancient panels of arms and plaques set in the walls. Over his lifetime, he would amass an extensive collection of classical statuary and architectural fragments acquired on visits to southern Europe. At the top of these worn steps is another sight to please the eye and soothe the spirit, the mosaic blue pool. The yew hedges are clipped in the shape of a family crest from Siena. The columns are Roman. Old bas-relief panels are set high in the stone wall. This wide pathway of raked gravel is called the Great Terrace. The cheerful blooms of daylilies give refreshing dabs of brightness to these borders. A contribution from other flowers and foliage is made by hardy geraniums, alstroemeria, red-hot pokers, neatly clipped mounds of rosemary, and the grey leaves of culinary sage and nepeta spilling over onto the gravel. Under the colonnade on the terrace is a handsome statue. This bronze wolf, suckling Romulus and Remus, was made for Peto in Naples. Various statues line the terrace, including the bust of a woman initialed by one of Louis XIV's sculptors. The nearby Casita is another monument to Peto's sense for the romantic and antiquarian. The tall pink marble Verona columns date from about 1200. The stone courtyard is planted with rosemary, lavender, and artemisias. Large terracotta urns on the gravel court contain corkscrew box topiary, underplanted with strawberry. Looking out from the Casita, the eye sweeps across a spellbinding panorama, a viewpoint that underscores Peto's sensitivity to the harmony of nature and the man-made, and his absolute artistry with plants, trees, water, wood, iron, and stone, from which he crafted this vision of loveliness. Marjorie Fish, the celebrated gardener, stated that the gardens that are remembered are those that lure you on. No one wants to linger in a garden that has no surprises. This is never more true than it is in the garden at Iford. something as simple as recent raindrops gleaming on the leaves of Alchemilla, or as complex and arresting as this 2nd or 3rd century AD stone sarcophagus, the surprises keep coming. The sound of water is a constant companion. It trickles from the mouths of bronze animals, gurgles from pipes, and empties into lily ponds from a fine 16th century figure of a huntsman, while this dog surveys it all with a quixotic smile. Walking to the east end of the Great Terrace, past the charming 18th century summer house, a larger building comes into view. This is Peter's most ambitious architectural statement at Eyford, the cloisters. The style is Italian Romanesque. 2 600-year-old stone lions guard the entry. The 16th century door and exceptionally fine old iron gates are from Verona. Inside, sounds echo off the cool stone and marble surfaces. Ancient architectural treasures are all around. Crosses from the 9th century, Gothic coats of arms, memorial tablets, crucifixes, friezes, and all this wedded into stonework that was created in this century by masons from the neighboring village of Westwood. This loggia is yet another testament to the man who fashioned this Italianate jewel at Eyford that basks quietly in its incongruous British setting. Pools, fountains, colonnades, statues, urns, ironwork, columns, balconies, notwithstanding trees, shrubs, plants, and flowers, all in perfect harmony in a most special garden. In the county of Hertfordshire, some 20 miles north of London, is the town of Hatfield. On the edge of town stands one of the finest Jacobean houses in Britain, Hatfield House. With its 1,500 acres of garden and park, Hatfield was built by Robert Cecil between 1607 and 1611. As chief minister to James I, Cecil had received the estate at Hatfield and its old 15th century episcopal palace from James I in exchange for another estate. Cecil then demolished most of the old palace to replace it with his new, more fashionable house. A part of the old palace next to the house still survives. Here Queen Elizabeth I lived as a child and was later held captive until she ascended to the throne. An important influence on the development of this early garden was John Tredescant the Elder. An accomplished gardener, he was one of Britain's first plant hunters, traveling the globe in search of new and rare plants and trees. Original 17th century documents of his garden records are in the archives at Hatfield. This newel post with his likeness and tools of the trade on the main stairway of the house is an indication of his importance to the household. The gardens at Hatfield today exist in good part as a result of the devotion and continuing work of the Marchioness of Salisbury, who presently resides here. Lady Salisbury graciously commented on the development of Hatfield's gardens.
Over the years, it has seen very many changes. During the time of the fashion for landscape, the gardens, the ancient gardens, which had been originally created, were swept away, and the park was brought right up to the walls of the house. After the landscaping of the park, the Lord Salisbury of the day was very interested in returning the gardens to what he believed was as they had been in Jacobean times. And my husband and I, since 1972, have worked to try and achieve gardens surrounding the house, perhaps more in harmony with that house, which is very little changed externally from the Jacobean days when it was built. It's very difficult to do it in exactly the same manner, but on the other hand we hope that it has something of the feel of the gardens of those days in 1607 to 11 when the gardens were created.
The old palace would have surely had a knot garden in Elizabethan times. Certainly one existed in 1875 when this picture was taken. The intricate patterns of low hedging are of clipped box and, with one exception, are filled with plants of the 15th, 16th and 17th century. Separated from the old palace garden by a gracefully undulating yew hedge is the west or privy garden. The view from the windows of the house accentuates the symmetrical layout of the garden. Stepping into the garden, the formality somehow curiously fades away. Far from being planted in a manner reflecting its period, the beds are now treated more like herbaceous borders. Permanent shrubs and roses, including a number of the popular New English variety, add height and stability to each bed. A dozen steps from the privy garden is the scented garden. On three sides, the garden is enclosed by lovely 400-year-old brick walls. On the fourth, by a clipped holly hedge. As its name implies, plants in this garden must have credentials that include fragrance. The generous and long borders on three sides of the garden showcase a variety of scented shrubs, old roses, and herbaceous plants. At the heart of this lovely enclosure is the herb garden. The design is centered around a sundial with pathway and beds edged with lavender. Naturally, the garden contains an extensive collection of herbs and scented antique roses. These ornamented iron gates lead to the East Gardens. Here, perhaps, is Hatfield's most revealing example of Lady Salisbury's gift. Her ability to tailor a garden unique to our time, using eclectic elements from the past, from other cultures, and from the present day. Two regimental avenues of manicured holm oaks and 17th century imported statuary established the classic Italian side of the garden's pedigree. The parterre is composed of 16 uniform beds, each enclosed by precise box hedging. The beds, which at times resemble miniature cottage gardens, are also liberally planted with old roses, wallflowers, lilies, iris, delphiniums, pinks, and many other perennials. The midsummer display can be quite splendid, as exhibited by this stand of peony-flowered poppies. In his book Period Gardens, Patrick Taylor sums up the spirit of Hatfield. He writes, "The most remarkable single aspect of Hatfield is that in this very large and complicated garden, the lasting taste and judgment of one person can be felt in every detail." The county of Dorset on England's south coast is a checkerboard of green fields, medieval seaports, thatched cottages, and remote country lanes. Near the town of Dorchester, sheltered by thick woodland, is a garden of a different kind, of a different size and disposition. This is a true cottage garden. To be more precise, it is novelist and poet Thomas Hardy's garden, and the cottage in which he was born and lived much of his life. This is the quintessential cottage-style garden. Narrow gravel paths wander willy-nilly through beds which have no particular shape or pattern. The planting is a free and easy affair, with a familiar and cheerful cast of characters that appears faithfully year after year in similar such gardens all over Britain. The medley of herbaceous plants, annuals, bulbs and shrubs is chosen more for flower than foliage. Like some happy family, they commingle, recreate and vie for attention as they lift the spirits of those that wander the paths. Simple wooden gates, no lawns, no empty spaces, very little soil to be seen. And of course it wouldn't be a traditional cottage garden without roses and honeysuckle scrambling over rustic arches and walls. Without the simple scent of everlasting sweet pea, or without a geranium on the windowsill. The cottage was built in 1800 by Hardy's great-grandfather. Here, amid the quiet and seclusion of this green sanctuary, Hardy began his literary career and wrote his novels, Far from the Madding Crowd and Under the Greenwood Tree. His life in the cottage, its garden, neighbouring Thorncombe Wood, and the nearby heath were all inspiration for his writings and are all recalled in his poetry and books. In his first poem, Domicilium, that he wrote at the age of 16, Thomas Hardy describes the scene here as he knew it, and as it looked when his grandparents first came to the cottage. Red roses, lilacs, variegated box are there in plenty, and such hardy flowers as flourish best untrained. Adjoining these are herbs and esculents, and farther still a field, then cottages with trees, and, last, the distant hills. Kent, on the southeast corner of England, is a county of orchards, hop growing, and once was a smuggler's paradise. It is also home to what has often been described as the most beautiful castle in England. Leeds Castle was built nearly 900 years ago in the reign of William the Conqueror's son, Henry I. It has been owned by King Henry VIII and has been the castle of 6 of England's medieval queens. It is embraced like a jewel by sweeping parklands, ancient trees, and beautifully wooded slopes. The garden at Leeds Castle is not quite what one would expect. This medieval island stronghold did not allow for an elaborate garden setting, but what it does have is a new garden created in 1980 by international garden designer Russell Page. This imaginative and charming small garden is called the Culpeper Garden, after Lord Culpeper, owner of the castle during the 17th century. Built on a sloping site, framed on 3 sides by stables, cottages, and old brick walls, the garden faces outward to Leeds' peaceful parkland. Underneath a veneer of formality, suggested by the tidy box hedging and patterned brick pathways, is a lovely old-fashioned flower garden. The Culpeper Garden has an easily understood layout, allowing everything to be seen close up. It has an unpretentious, relaxed character and a bounty of plants and shrubs crammed into its many beds, close to 1,000 varieties. Let Russell Page's words describe the garden as he perceived it shortly after it was completed. A simple pattern of paths has been established to enable you to walk this way and that through a field of flowers. The garden will be filled with lilacs and old-fashioned roses, with iris and cottage pinks, poppies and lupins, lad's love and lavender, and many other favorites, old and new, to make a walled-in enclosure of scent and color in the 20th century manner. The border of Wales lies a few miles due west of the English town of Shrewsbury. Near the market town of Welshpool, sharp eyes will spot a brick-coloured castle off in the distance. This is Powys Castle, a red limestone giant towering over panoramic views of villages, fertile fields and rolling hills. Quarried from the ground on which it stands, 17th century Powys, like most of Britain's old castles, has its own rich history of kings and queens, lords and their ladies. But Powys owes much of its fame to its spectacular gardens, in particular the dramatic hanging terraces, 4 in all, which step down the castle's precipitous slope. These grand galleries are the finest surviving example in Britain of a late 17th century terraced garden. They descend quickly to lawn, woodland, and the formal gardens of Powys. The formal and fountain gardens and the croquet lawn should by no means be intimidated by their more celebrated peers on the terraces above. They have charisma of their own. With their Edwardian sentiment, these borders edging the croquet lawn depend on hybrid musk, floribunda, modern shrub roses, and delphinium to lead the way. In the neighboring formal garden, uniform lines of apple trees dot the lawn, each with its own pool of color below. This clever design is achieved by using ground covers of golden marjoram, silver stachys, and lamium. The golden marjoram theme is echoed underneath the vine-covered pergola. The end of the garden is signaled by a row of honeysuckle vines trained up stout posts to resemble small trees. The lowest pathway is the apple slope terrace, although most of the trees that now flank the simple grass path are Japanese maples. Summer floral color in the border is restrained, but foliage interest makes up for it, with a variety of plants and shrubs with rich red, bronze, and purple leaf interest. Up one level is the orangery terrace. The central feature dividing its lavish borders is the handsome balustraded brick orangery. The rusticated sandstone arch entranceway is framed with yellow Banksia rose and magnolia. Past the mellow wall where old climbers nod in the afternoon sunshine, the west side of the terrace unfolds. Contained by formal hedges, both sides burst forth with a densely packed display of free-growing conifers, informal shrubs, clematis on iron hoops, and a wealth of herbaceous underplanting. Back past the orangery, at the east end of the terrace, a tunnel in the immense bulging yew hedge leads to steps back down the slope. The borders here are of a different nature, more brazen in colors. Hot reds, golds, and yellows predominate. Next in order, up the steep slopes of Powys, is the aviary terrace, where fruits and vegetables were once grown, and where the wisteria-draped brick aviary now houses a collection of scented rhododendrons. Symbolic of Powys are the graceful lead statues of shepherds and shepherdesses that dance on the balustrade. They are by John van Nost, 18th century Flemish sculptor. In contrast to the terrace below, the path on this level is gravel and quite narrow. Slender borders take on a distinct Mediterranean look. Foliage is silver, grey and variegated. The top of the wall is straddled with dark masses of ancient yew. The scene below is especially rewarding. Finally, the uppermost level, the top terrace, is attained. This site is designed more for the outward view, the inner spirit, and to gain perspective of Powys's marvelous vertical garden. Throughout the year, on columns, pedestals, and niches in the long brick wall, pots of terracotta, spilling over with tender plants, present a lovely still life. Powys Castle Garden is a superb horticultural achievement, a glorious tribute to all the gardeners over the centuries who have left their signatures here. Not the least, those of today under the direction of head gardener Jimmy Hancock, whose skill and artistry has shaped Powys's garden for the last quarter of a century. The county of Wiltshire is noted for its agriculture, prehistoric Stonehenge, and figures and symbols cut out of the white chalk downs. It also has one of the loveliest gardens in the south of England, the garden at Heale House. Heale was built in the latter part of the 16th century. As would be expected, it has had its share of owners and undergone many changes. In 1651, the house served as a hiding place for King Charles II. Twice it has been given as a wedding gift, and in 1835, two-thirds of it burned down. The garden at Heale is the exquisite achievement of Lady Anne Rash, who, along with her husband, Major David Rash, has tended it for the last 35 years. Within its structure, it has everything that a gardener could wish for: old walls and stonework, mature trees, hedges, woodland and meadow, rosy old brick, and the River Avon, rippling lazily by. A measure of thanks must also be given to architect Harold Peto. Plans which he drafted in 1910 were used for the terrace areas surrounding the house. The use of classical and Italianate materials, which was his indulgence, has never found a more fertile canvas. Lead planters are casually placed here and there, and massive magnolias flank the elegant French windows. Simple underplantings skirt the lichen-spattered balustrades. The rambling roses here are legacies of the 1920s and have long forgotten names. Elsewhere the borders are full and often quite tall, but always contain roses. On this terrace are two circular fish ponds. Nearby is another beguiling Peto-inspired scene, a small boat landing with the ubiquitous roses splashing color over the scarred stone. Following the little Carrier stream downriver, the vista opens up to giant gunnera and willow and to a scarlet bridge. This is a smaller copy of the famous Japanese Nikko Bridge. It leads to the charming and authentic Japanese tea house, Heal's concession to whimsy. These were both brought back from Japan by diplomat the Honorable Louis Greville, Major Rash's great-uncle. On the tranquil site circling the tea house and beyond, little streams twist and turn under pathways, past banks of ferns and lilies, maple, magnolia, and cherry trees. And never far away, there's always a swan. Quite appropriate, because the swan on a coronet is the family's crest. Heal is a comfortable garden. The absence of order and direction promotes a heightened sense of intimacy and pleasure. There may even be the slightest suggestion now and then of a kind of planned nonchalance. This is readily explained with a quote from poet Robert Herrick, "A sweet disorder in the dress, that do more bewitch me than when art is too precise in every part." The borders in the garden all have differing but disarming qualities. Roses always get top billing in summer. The frequent use of red and gold leaved shrubs and trees like cotinus, plum, and Philadelphus contrast with the silvery grays of thistles, verbascum, and nepeta, and intensify the brilliance of their floral companions. This gate reveals another facet of Heal's capricious nature. This is the Tunnel Garden, so named because of its remarkable avenues of espaliered apple trees that crisscross the width and breadth of the space. These long, airy arches are another of Heal's pleasant and plentiful surprises. The tunnel garden, with its central lily pond, is both decorative and productive. Part of it is devoted to vegetables and soft fruits, the others to flowers for picking. The garden has narrow borders on three sides, which display blotches of penstemon, spikes of verbascum, and willowy mallow, along with roses, of course, and vines and climbers on the old walls. Could there be a more endearing confection than that of clematis, delphinium, and roses? Lady Anne and Major Rash reminisced about their beloved Heal and what it was like when they came to live here in 1959.
There was nothing. It had been taken over by the hospital during the war, and it had a potato patch, and in a few places the brambles were a bit higher than they were in the rest of it, and that was where the balustrading was. I mean, it absolutely disappeared. And we started in a very small way 40 years ago, and it's gradually, partially recovered. Anyway.
It's taken us over, hasn't it?
Absolutely, absolutely. In the good days when it had 9 gardeners, I can just remember, it was rather different. But now we're very lucky to have 2. I mean, it's a different, on a different scale, obviously. But we still think it's got a certain point. And it relates, I think, to what people want of a garden. It isn't very grand, it's not important. But people seeing it can relate it to what they can do themselves.
Memories taken away from Heal are the kind that last a lifetime. It is Lady Anne's sentiment in her own words that Heal is not a horticultural achievement or learned collection of plants worthy of admiration, but to be accepted more as a muddled collection of colors and shapes, textures and smells which have grown into their positions, and much as a favorite old garment after years of use becomes indispensable to its owner. It has been said that heaven is under our feet as well as over our heads. This is certainly never more true than in Britain, an island of countless fascinating gardens. Whether big or small, grand or modest, old or new, all these myriad gardens possess very separate and unique identities. Yet somehow they all remain unmistakably British. And each and every one a treasured part of this lovely and captivating garden kingdom called Britain.